Dear learners, today we have with us Dr. Oinam Hemlata Devi. She is assistant professor at Ambedkar University, Delhi, and she has a specialization in anthropology. And you can see, I mean, a lot of publication she has done in this field, and she is very expert in this development and environmentalism. And today we are going to have a session on this. This is block 2 of MST 013. So, ma'am, welcome you, and you can start the session, ma'am.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Rita. I will try my best to address some of the important points or the topic which I have taken today, that is development and environmentalism. However, please keep in mind that, as I have mentioned in the last meeting, that your two units, environmentalism and impact of development, is the area where you're trying to connect it with today's presentation point or the topics which I have brought. What I have brought in today's presentation is the general understanding of development and environmentalism, how the two are related with one another, or how developmental projects lead to the idea of environmentalism, or how environmentalism helps in the development process of different communities. Okay. I may not be taking the exact cases or detailed elaborations of examples which are mentioned in your Unit 3, Environmentalism and 4, Impact of Development, where some of the very popular, cases of environmental movements like the Sarawak rainforest case in Malaysia and Chipko movement in India was discussed in case of discussing environmentalism. And then in the impact of development, different areas like water pollution, soil pollution, and then air pollution are being discussed, including biodiversity conservation process and how these are related or how these have become the major impact of developmental projects. But these are some of the very common examples which we all get to know. So instead of focusing on those cases, I brought a general understanding of what is this development, how is development being understood by different people, what are the major areas which we need to look at when looking at environment, and then what is this environmentalism. So first of all, we'll try to separately discuss these two concepts and then see how the two are interrelated. And definitely when we go ahead the slide points, you will also definitely be able to establish a connectivity between development and environmentalism for sure. And please note down for all the queries you would be coming up in between the presentation. Okay, so first I would like to come to the definitions of development. I brought this definition with a focus that, there are lots of these definitions provided when we talk about development or when we use the word development. And different scholars, different disciplinary background, different thinkers use different ways of looking at it, or how it is being understood was very much based on their perception and interpretation depending on the socio-economic and political scenario of a particular country. So in order to have a generalized understanding of development and how it is being understood, let me start from the very basic of what is this definition. I know it's a very simple and common terminology which we have been using, which we all know, but sometimes we find it very difficult in explaining the simplest concepts in a very conceptual framework or in a very definitive way in few sentences where you are also supposed to bring lot many points which are basically important to address and define. So, when we are trying to understand development from a very layman point of view, then any act or any process of development, growth, or progress can be brought under the term development. However, development is not purely an economic phenomena. Rather, it is a multidimensional process involving reorganization, and orientation of entire economic and social system. So from this definition itself, you'll get to know that, when we talk about development, it's not just connected directly with economic phenomena, but it's also something where there are different other factors which are actually influencing towards the economic development or the improvement in the economic phenomena. And in that, a set of these relationships which are present or which are oriented in a social system could be noticed. However, as we progress, or however we, as different countries participate in the globalized world, development is always understood from the lens of modernization. Because, when we use the word development, then the concept or idea of modernization comes in. And in simple word, when we use the word modernization, then it is something which is connected with the use of science and technology in the life and living of a particular community, society, or country, right? So when we talk about development as a modernization, then its emphasis is going to be given on the processes of social change that will require to have a better economic condition. However, that sort of change will also examine in social, psychological, and political processes. And these are going to be possible through the development of science and technology, which will later on lead to the change in the behavioral situations of different countries, communities, or even the policy making process. How to develop wealth oriented behavior and values in individuals, profit seeking rather than subsistence and self sufficiency is the core of understanding development. As we have discussed in the last class, we were talking about different modes of subsistence, different forms of society, starting from hunting, gathering to pastoralism to agricultural society. And by the time people move from hunting, gathering to pastoralism to subsistence or agriculture and settled living conditions, then the concept of property, the concept of wealth has been developed, or excess production of resources had happened, and that is how a wealth-oriented behavior has been, uh, you know, uh, uh, flourish in and around the whole process, and that has led to the sense of profit making. So, in a way, when we talk about development, it's kind of shifting from a very commodity subsistence based to human approach with certain sense of investment, not only on the resource production, but knowledge production, such as education and skill training. What is this development? We do not have a clear definition, right? Many disciplines, particularly development studies, consider it as something which is very much revolve around poverty and inequality. Again, when we talk about development, macro level mechanics of development was mainly replaced by micro level projects, or the small scale level of understanding at different aspects, then try to look at the holistic level of that particular scenario and interpret it as development. Development as a normative concept or an intentional process or project, in the sense that it is also sometimes considered it as a very standardized normal way of looking at the progress, where different focus based or intention based project implementation has been involved. Duplessier's 1972 stresses the importance of three interdependent indicators for explaining development. They are poverty, unemployment, and inequality, where economic growth is just merely, more or less, commensurate to the process of understanding this, relationship, or sort of uh, representing the three parameters: poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Cohen and Santon studied and explain development as deliberate intervention. It's a kind of intentional way of making intervention, making certain process or practical intervention to bring changes in the already existing system. According to United States, when we talk about development, then it is to lead a long and healthy life. Means if you do something, then it is supposed to lead long and healthy lives, to be knowledgeable, to have access to the resources needed for a decent standard of living, and to be able to participate in the life of the community. Now, looking at this definition and also uh, focusing all over the globe, around the world, scenario, places of the world in terms of development or progress can be categorically divided. Here, when we look at this, world can be categorized or ranked into separate, that is first
Hemlata,
world
slide is not
countries,
moving.
second and third world countries.
Hemlata, Dr.
Yes,
Hemlata, slide is
yeah.
not moving. Slide is not moving.
Is it visible, this slide,
And
United
the first
States
page
one?
is visible. Skip up. It's not moving.
Um,
Now it's moving. Now it's moving.
is it visible?
Yeah.
And is it moving?
Yeah, it's moving. Yeah.
Okay, then I think I should not go for a full slide. I'll just increase the size. Okay. Please tell me again, is it moving?
Yes.
Okay, now. So now the places of the world in terms of development or progress can be divided or can be categorized into the following sections or categories for our understanding or looking at development. That is ranking into separate worlds, that is first world countries, second and third world countries. Then as per the geographical ranking, we can divide world into north and south. Then ranking according to the wealth, we can divide it into rich and poor countries. Then economic and industrial ranking, based on the economic and industrial development, countries can be divided into more economically developed countries, or say less economically developed countries, or say newly developed countries. So different categories of these developmental forms of understanding world can be understood. NIC is the newly industrialized countries. So based on the economic situation and industrial status of a particular country, world's different countries can be categorized into different ranks or different lists. Why do we need to learn about development, or what is supposed to be done in this when we're looking at development? An accurate understanding of the developing world, that is, the problems, causes, and solutions, than charity advertising. When we look at this particular statement, while understanding that why we are, you know, focusing on development, why do we need to study development, this is one of the answer. However, this is not the final and very acceptable form of answer, as this answer itself is criticized by different scholars and academicians, and that we'll get to know when we go ahead also, or else what they want to say as a problematic or contested statement on this is that an accurate understanding of the developing world, within this process of understanding development world, the problems, causes, simultaneously different countries also try to provide solutions, and that solution itself is contested through the lens of political understanding. There, in the name of providing solutions, different developed countries, different countries with their personal interest based knowledge system try to manipulate the systems instead of resolving certain issues. So sometimes what happens is that in the name of providing solutions, people try to address or meet some of their hidden agenda. And one of the answer for looking at development is reducing the gap between the countries. And another point is reduce the ethnocentric views and influence on development. When we are talking about this ethnocentric views, then it is considered as the viewpoint of what we want to interpret our own status and our level of living. Like when we talk about the modes of productions or modes of subsistence, it is also considered that which society or which form of society is being considered as more advanced form of society is something which has been interpreted by developed European countries. And that itself is something which is very much Eurocentric, or, from the point of view of European countries, that is the Western centric or ethnocentric views. Likewise, when you try to make certain interpretation based on your own experience, from your own understanding, belief systems, and also norms, then that is your own point and perception. That is what we call it as the ethnocentric point of view. So in order to reduce such ethnocentric, country-based, community-based, society-based views, we should be trying to understand and engage more with the development. And for that, what is supposed to be done? At world level, different countries try to interpret development using GDP or HDI. And we all need to question over this, that when we're looking at this GDP, it also overlooks domestic production for home consumption and informal economy. Or sometimes GDP also conceals the inequalities which are present within the countries, within the state, or at local level. Likewise, when we talk about the social well-being, adult literacy and life expectancy is not enough to judge the level of well-being. High SDI may not agree with, the level of this GDP. So there are problematic sides even for measuring this development using GDP and HDI. What I'm trying to say out here is that when we are trying to look at development, what is supposed to be done or what is being taken by different countries at the world level, we also need to know the gaps which are present within it. So, as we have already mentioned, that when we talk about development, there is no as such clear-cut definition. Taking cue from there, we can define development by bringing different aspects depending on a particular country's situation, particular country's economic phenomena, because economic and resource conditions. And likewise, you can bring different parameters to address and interpret development. It can be in the line of economic growth, or in the line of environment, personal wealth, life expectancy. And from country to country, your definition, your emphasis on one of the parameter will be definitely not going to have a similar weightage while comparing with another parameter, say mobility, right, or migration. But in some country, migration can play an important role in understanding the development of that particular country. Now, how do we, get a sense of the history of development? Whenever we talk about development, the first point for understanding development is very much connected with the introduction of steam engine, or in the 18th and early 17th centuries industrialization process, right? And after that, there is a lot more uh, uh, increase in the population growth. Urbanization has been increased because you do have better railways, better services, and there people have also started moving from rural to urban. And this is the stage where a major challenge in the population growth had happened in the world history. After that, from the steam engine to different forms of urbanization, including the colonization process, we do have World War II. And after World War II, the whole idea of this development has changed, or what we call it as the concept of modernization, the use of science and technology in the country or in a particular society or at world level has changed. And these major changes were occurred particularly in 1950s and 60s. When I'm saying this 1950s and 60s, one need to note down out here is that just after the post-World War II, we also have a very
Cold War situation in the world political scenario. And because of this Cold War situations, there were also a huge competition of, which ideology a particular should follow, or the communist ideology should be derailed or should be uh, discouraged in one or other way. So there are different ways and means to uh, uh, defractionalize or decategorize these understandings of the political ideology. And in order to do that, you need certain, advancement in science and technology. Without the help of your industrialization, without the help of urbanization and technological development, or the overall change in the living condition of the society or a country, competition with the rest of the world is not going to be possible. And such world political scenario has led to the major changes of this modernization process by different world communities. And this has led to a successful era of what we call it as the capitalist era, where people are looking more towards the profit-making based economy instead of the very classical, liberal economy where state interference would be less, but it should also be in concern with equal rights to every individual members of a particular country. Now, this whole use of this mechanization or use of technology has transformed what we call it as a traditional or pre-modern society into a very complex technology-based society, and where we could see a lot of these political systems have started intervening in the overall functioning. And many countries which were once colonized by the European countries have even appeared functioning in the same characteristic way of administration like the Western European countries had done during the colonial period. So, post-colonial period is also considered as an interpretation of another form of, colonial expansion in, different parts of the countries, including India's rural villages. And that has led to major exploitation of rural communities, resources, including forest and, forest resources, particularly timber related products. Now, the role of developed countries in developing countries. So the colonized countries could also adopt different machineries, different mechanisms, different knowledge systems of administration like the European countries. However, even after this process, the developed countries' ways of looking towards the developing or underdeveloped countries were not as such that they remained quiet. They try to intervene or interrupt the overall functioning in one or other ways, but this time this was in the form of providing health and support to the developing countries. That is through investment in factories, or becoming expertise in certain fields of technology, or certain development of the equipment systems, or provision of funding agencies. So that is how the developed countries, particularly Western European or rest of the other advanced European countries and US, started looking towards the developing and underdeveloped countries in Asia and African countries. And this has led to what we call it as the neoliberal form of development, which is nothing but this is actually helping the profit-making process of major private companies or corporate companies, at their possible length. And this has actually affected the life and living of the indigenous communities to such an extent that later on there are lots of these protests and movements have developed in the form of social movement, environmental movement, which is nothing but that has led to the birth of environmental concerns, from different communities, from those traditional communities and from the elite communities who are showing concern towards those affected communities. And in short, what we call it as environmentalism, the concern of environment, the concern about the degraded environmental condition, concern of the people affected by the degraded environmental condition, but who are the main cause or the causers of this environmental degradation, which systems are causing, is something which were always sidelined in the overall understanding of environmentalism. In this process of understanding history of development, we also need to know that there were programs of development from time to time, and these days we have sustainable development goal, and through this world communities are trying to achieve a very sustainable form of development by 2030. Before that, we have Millennium Development Goals. Some of the goals were quite successfully achieved by different countries, while some could not be achieved, including India. Now, with this, let me come to this environmentalism, and then let's see how the two could be connected. But let me first explain what is this environmentalism. So environmentalism is a framework, or it's different ways of looking at and explaining the cause and solutions of environmental problems. In short, it's sort of showing concern about or concern over environmental issues and problems. It's about protection of environment through activism and development of ideas or different ideologies. It is also considered as analysis of the driving factors, what causes different environmental issues that play an important role to the development of environmental policy. And the political ideas and ways of thinking about environment itself. It is not just about protection of environment. It's not about understanding the problem or, finding out the cause, but those political ideas or those conceptual thinkings and thought process which is connected with environment itself can be brought under the concept of environmentalism, or in a broader sense, we also call it as politics of the environment. Now, evolution of these environmental issues, if we try to trace with a clear-cut timeline, then we can categorize it into three. That is, first generation environmental issues, second generation environmental issues, and third generation environmental issues. In the first generation environmental issue, you would see people looking at preservation and conservation, right? And people are trying to look more about protection of wildlife and habitat, soil erosion, and local pollution. Here in the unit environmentalism, it has been mentioned about the biosphere people and ecosystem people when you are talking about preservation and conservation. And definitely when we talk about this, ecosystem people, they are much more connected towards the preservation, while biosphere people are, more or less connected with the conservation process. If you are not clear about, or if you are not at all heard about the word ecosystem people and biosphere people, then I can explain it. But in short, these are that, those group of people who live closer to the forest, natural habitat and environment are the ecosystem people, and those people who live in a urban environment, advanced urbanized section, they are the biosphere people, or those people who are living and living a life where their resources and livelihood are very much dependent on the produce brought by the ecosystem people are the biosphere people. Now, in this first generation phase of preservation and conservation, from the points mentioned, we also clearly know that people are more focused about the wildlife protection or soil erosion and local level pollution. But if you look at the second generation, then there is a level up to understand environmentalism or to look at the concerns associated. That is already started from 60s, where people are becoming more conscious about population growth and how it has impacted or brought into different issues and problems to environment, and then how technology plays an important role in bringing different issues or solving the environmental issues, or different activities, technological development led to desertification issues or use of pesticides and how it has connected or affected the life and living of people, resource depletion, or pollution abatement. These are all major problems and issues which are already discussed starting from 1960s and before 1970s, and this phase is considered it as the second generation modern environmentalism, or second generation ways of looking at environmental issues. And third generation is the global issues, which we all know about: acid rain, ozone depletion, rainforest destruction, climate change, loss of biodiversity, or say genetically modified organisms, and how it is impacting the health conditions of the people. Now, when we talk about this earlier environmentalism, to know better with some of the examples, the first generation preservation and conservation is mainly from pre-1960s, where people were focusing more on these four major areas of protection of wildlife, habitat, soil erosion, and local level pollution. So during the World War II and aftermath of it, we know that there were major changes in the world politics, world geographical conditions, and also including environmental conditions that has led to various environmental problems, such as different disasters. And one of the immediate disaster is the London smoke that was happened in 1952. So now, from these, some of the major incidences of air and water pollution occurred immediately after World War II. World communities, particularly USA, became very much aware about the side effects of these pollution, and they have started creating protection of natural environment, particularly environmental protection agency has been created and laws were being implemented in the country. Now, the Clean Air Act was established in London in 1956. So we can imagine that how the Great London Smoke has led to the establishment of the Clean Air Act in London itself. The second generation modern environmentalism, here we can again connect it with some of the examples. Origin of it is the global ecological crisis that has threatened the existence of humankind. That is, population increase happen, use of more modern based technology, and then resources are depleting to a faster rate. So eco disasters such as oil spillage from Tory Canyon tanker in 1967 occur, and that has led to major water pollution. Then Minamata poisoning in Japan, where mercury contamination from late 1950s to 60s, and which has led to the cause of cancer patients to the population of Japan. Then we can also link it with Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, a book which Rachel Carson has written, is quite popular, and I'm sure that everybody in the class must have aware of this particular book. And she's wrote on the use of this particularly synthetic chemicals, that is DDT, and which is still used by the developing and underdeveloped agricultural based countries, including India. And then in 1973, we have Chipko movement. 1973, again, we have Silent Valley movement in Kerala, Chipko in Garhwal, Devi area. And this Chipko movement, or this Devi area movement, has been discussed in your paper itself, and where the major focus is given on how different local level participation has been expanded to the national level, to international level recognition. And this has again changed the overall discourse of understanding the socio-environmental based, very local based, Garhwal Terry based movement into international level attention. And this has developed a different discourse of understanding environmentalism. So we can say that whenever we talk about social and environment-based movement, then it is always political, and activists are the one who have usually captured the platform to to attract the attention of the world communities, and they demand for world values and structure of society as per the ideologies. And this is very important when we talk about it, because not every activist do have different forms of steering the movements. Rather, their movements are being controlled or influenced by the ideologies of some of the political parties or agencies or different power-based stakeholders. Now, the third generation or global level issues are considered as those issues which were developed late 1970s onwards, particularly Bhopal gas tragedy, which was happened in December 2, 1984, or Narmada Bachao Andolon 1985, or Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster April 26, 1986, and Montreal Protocol in 1987, where ban of CFCs, halons, and other ozone-depleting chemicals were happened through this protocol, or Terry Dam conflict happened in 1990s again. So from this third generation itself also, you can see that, say, suppose if we take the example of Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster happened in 1986 at Ukraine, where Ukraine was part of the USSR by that time, then how the whole incident of nuclear power plant and its disaster and side effects were kept as a silent information to the government and administrative bodies. The disclosure of the whole disaster and its side effects or probable radiation side effects could be notified to the citizens of Ukraine after 1 week of the disaster. And by that time, people have already got infected by the radiation. And so till today, people were suffering from this radiation-based diseases and illnesses. Even for understanding those diseases and illnesses, there were political arguments or political players coming into the picture and creating their own narratives about this concern of the area, concern of the people, concern of the environment. And these are a whole lot of issues engaged, and their different world participants came into picture. And this has been again connected with the profit making, what we call it as the neoliberal capitalism approach. And this was how the rich people became more profit making, and rich people became more richer, and poor people become the sufferer, more poorer, and also victims of all this disaster. And similar case has happened in Bhopal gas tragedy that was happened in 1984, where I think even the deformities of, or the genetical abnormalities, deformities, disabilities resulted from this Bhopal gas tragedy are still faced by the people of Bhopal. Right? And there were no as such proper compensation or environmental justice being provided to that incident related issue. Now, understanding this whole concept of environmentalism, and I hope that at least we are clear about what is this environmentalism, how environmentalism can be understood into different stages, and while trying to understand these different stages of environmentalism, what instances can be incorporated into those different categories of environmentalism, and accordingly you can imagine the degree of complexities involved from first generation environmentalism to third generation environmentalism. Now, looking at the Indian scenario, how the whole idea of environmental sociology came into the picture, and it connects it with the local level participation. The idea of environmental sociology originated in 1960s. Environment, ecology, and importance of social science has sort of a very big recognition came during this time, and a sociological imagination regarding ecosystem, ecology, relationship between human and environment had been started discussing. Social concerns of environmental problems, impact of environment on communities or societies, or search for viable reforms and sustainable development had already been started through different disciplinary studies. So some of the environmentalists, including like Anil Agrawal of CSC, had proposed that there should be a calculation of this environment, that is the gross natural product, so that the importance of the environment is become known to everyone, and also we can understand the context of the massive resource exploitation and depletion which is happening in the Indian scenario. Indian social ecology and environmentalism is mainly, proposed or moved or say argued and explained by Ramachandra Guha and Gadgil. And from there, it was viewed that, from their point of view, it has been viewed that the consistent conflict over natural resources or reduction of resources are mainly coming due to huge population and the level of poverty, which is sort of becoming very normal situation in Indian scenario. So two things are very important, that is the population size and level of living or poverty, poor condition of the people had led to major resource conflict. And so such major conflict had also again increased post-independence. Post-independence, we could see a lot of changes in the Indian scenario, that is industrialization, urbanization, that has resulted into different discourses about development. Development has been understood, it has been constructed by different people in different ways. There are different development-induced displacements had happened, and all these had led to the reactions or concerns of what we call it as environmentalism in India. So the environmental issues and politics, in this we need to know that environmental lobby has become an important actor at national and international politics. Here, when again, if you go back to your unit 3 on environmentalism, taking the example of Diploma or say Sarawak rainforest in Malaysia, you will see that lots of these lobbying happen where even Malaysian government tried to create some committees to assess the resources, its advantages, or why is this particular development policy became a failed policy. And through that, they try to develop a new mechanism to control it. So or say other outside NGOs also came into picture in order to sort of subside the whole effort which is made by the government. So a lot of this environmental lobby has become an important actor at national and international politics. Dramatic stance of eco warriors also become a political performance. Like some of the, you can take examples of some of the activists. Key policy or decision makers are mainly, we know they are all from elites or business corporate groups. Other than this, at the world level, you could also see green politics, which are present mainly in the Western countries. And it has become an important agenda for every political party. The traditional materialist issue, which is kind of very much core focus on the electoral politics, is related to economy, taxation, public order, welfare policy, and all. What I'm trying to bring out here on traditional materialist issue is that the whole idea of this environmental issue and politics, which is present at the traditional level, is something which is controlled and managed by the situation or phenomena which we call it as electoral politics. The politicians or representative members of different political organizations play an important role in compromising and negotiating certain situations, whether it's about accessibility of resources or say giving compensation for a particular development project. Environmental protection policies and regulations thus develop depending on such lobbying or such activist movements, decision or participation, or the ideologies of different political parties. So when we talk about this, then to further understand that how such environmentalism could help in bringing a sustainable decision is also very much dependent on the environmental politics. And for that, we can take the help of Nell Carter's three approaches of understanding environmental politics, that is study of environmental theories and ideas that is relating to the environment. That is the main ideology of a political party, or examination of political parties and environmental movements. Probably we would have a very clear idea when we take the examples. The analysis of public policy making and implementation affecting the environment at international, national, and local level. Here, people are talking more about the sustainable society and all, because here different policies and programs which are connected with the environmental protection or environmental conservation at national, international, and local levels. So the level of uh, dealing with such environmental issues are always projected towards having a sustainable society. Now, when we talk about this, it's kind of further simplification of those three ideologies. That is, concern between human beings and natural resources is also going to be very much dependent on what we call it as the ideological, or when we again talk about ideological, it is going to be political, and which is nothing but earlier it was considered as part of environmentalism. It is associated with different ideologies depending on the thought processes of those different organizations, institutions, activists, and agencies. Social movements are addressed by analyzing policies and their impact on environment. So these ideologies are again, shaped by the movements, or how the social and environmental movements take different turns will also be controlled and influenced by the ideology, or these ideologies will set the movements and styles of these social movements or environmental movements. In order to understand, or in order to highlight this, um, here I would like to bring one particular case to simplify it, that the political incentives for biodiversity conservation is a paper written by Ashwini Chatre and Vasant Savarwal, where the major focus is going to be given on the area or development of Great Himalayan National Park. And this is mainly for the conservation of the wildlife, that is the particular bird, Western Trogopan. And in the name of this conservation, there are different political interests, political agenda involved. That is what? Dam construction. And through dam construction, you will have major electrical generation possibility for the state of Himachal Pradesh. So the power dynamics of this eco-development politics is also happen in such a way that state government acts as the implementing agency or decision making agency for deciding of what will happen in this particular Great Himalayan National Park, while the local community who were dependent on that particular area for ages have suddenly become displaced, as the forest department had encircled or demarcated the area under the protection site, and that has led to major conflicts. But interesting point which is coming up out here is that these conflicts over the use of resources and natural resources available in this particular national park is that it is again controlled or manipulated by the electoral politics. What happened is that after the announcement of this Himalayan National Park, there was a very continuous phase of elections coming one after another, whether it's a local level election, municipal level election, state level, or say central level. Elections are coming throughout the year during that time while the dam construction were supposed to take place. And when the elections are coming at the doorstep, then definitely the politicians will also like to negotiate in terms of the accessibility of certain resources by giving permits to the access of these some of the resources like mushroom collection, grazing site, to the local people. Then they could gain the sort of these sympathy or agreement from the people and local community for their electoral gains. right? And so the so-called whole policy of protection has been compromised and negotiated within this process. So negotiations to the excess of resource, whether grazing, mushroom collection, or medicinal plants and foods, are always happen. And this has happened because emphasis on electorates were more than elimination of excess policy in the conservation process. What I'm trying to say here is that protests by the locals and negotiations of access right between the political representatives or the party representatives and politicians have brought the concept of environmentalism into a different figure of understanding the conservation process. And that itself is nothing that the major cause of or the major concern of this accessibility and also lack of these resources for the local community has been sidelined. Rather, they have brought something for the electoral gain or for the gain of their elections. Now, the politics of the environment and its implication has brought major problems. So, environmental problems revolves around this economic resources. Economy being a material ground of resource, politics has played in shaping cultural theory, history, nature of the resource exploitation and negotiation, or political regulations and policy making, or even the way how the governance and performance of the rules and regulations which are present in a particular place is been uh, you know uh, explained. So in conclusion, what I want to mention out here is that state bureaucracy and the vested economic interest in the form of state bureaucracy and people with vested economic interest in the form of different stakeholders show a rhetoric of development, science, and resource management when there is also a hidden agenda behind. The politics between these different stakeholders and those affected by the development projects or environmental degradation led to most social and environmental movements that are again engendered to more linkages and power relation, attracting different agents at national and international level, sometimes diverting the root cause of the environmental problems and issues. Such movements sometimes lost its own origin due to the vested interest of these agents. Yeah, so some of the references. And with this, I will stop the presentation. However, I will suggest that the cases which are mentioned in the 2 units, you all have to go through because case of Sarawak rainforest and timber felling issue, and then Chipko movement issue, and then water pollution, POSCO movement. These are something which are very important, and I'm sure that these are all one-time reading, which everybody can go through easily. Yeah. And once you have understood these movements and connecting it with some of the points which I have mentioned in the class about development, environmentalism, its discourses, who are the main players or actors in shaping this environmentalism, then an overall interpretation of what is this environmentalism, how is this being connected with development, could be easily developed. Yeah. Thank you.